Moonlight washes over a silent procession of cloaked figures. They move toward a sealed hall, their purpose shrouded in a vow of silence that carries the threat of death. This was not mere theater. It was the heart of the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most sacred and secretive rites of the ancient world, centered on a goddess we think we know. We recognize Demeter as the Greek goddess of the harvest, a symbol of bounty and grain, but that familiar image is just the surface. Beneath it lies a far deeper, darker, and more compelling reality. Demeter was the core of hidden rituals that shaped Greek spirituality for nearly 2,000 years, rituals that promised initiates a blissful afterlife and transformed personal grief into cosmic truth. By the end of this journey, you will understand how the simple act of planting a seed was once linked to the greatest mysteries of life, death, and what lies beyond. We will explore the sacred brew that might have opened visionary doors, the women-only rites that ensured the fertility of an entire state, and the profound secret so powerful it was never written down. What is the true cost of a secret that must never be told? But to grasp the true weight of that silence, we must first understand the world that demanded it. This was not a casual harvest festival where people gave thanks and went home. Demeter's worship formed the bedrock of a sprawling, organized cult, one with its own sacred geography. Its undisputed heart was the small town of Eleusis, just a dozen miles from Athens. For centuries, a solemn procession traced that path every autumn, a river of humanity flowing toward the Telesterion, the great initiation hall. But Eleusis was not alone. Major sanctuaries dedicated to Demeter and her daughter Persephone dotted the Greek world from Sicily to Asia Minor, each a node in a vast spiritual network. Her priests and priestesses were not mere ceremonial figures. They were powerful civic officials, often from noble families, who managed enormous estates, interpreted sacred law, and held the keys to rituals that could ensure or jeopardize the fertility of the entire land. Who sought her favor? Everyone. The farmer praying for rain over his barley field stood in the same line as the Athenian general seeking victory, the philosopher pondering the soul's journey, and the young bride hoping for children. Demeter's promise was universal. In this life, she offered the literal sustenance of the grain and the social stability that came from full storehouses. But her greater gift, the one that truly bound the culture together, was for the next life. Initiation into her mysteries was believed to guarantee a blessed existence in the afterlife, a stark contrast to the shadowy, grim fate that awaited ordinary souls in the common Greek imagination. To be an initiate was to hold a special ticket for eternity. This dual blessing, prosperity now and paradise later, made her cult not a fringe belief, but a core component of Greek identity for nearly 2 millennia. It was the quiet, profound thread woven through the fabric of their civilization, making the secrets at its center all the more valuable and all the more dangerous to reveal. This sprawling cult, with its promise of paradise, found its most profound expression in a single annual event. The Eleusinian Mysteries were not just a ritual, they were the spiritual climax of the Greek year, a carefully orchestrated drama that unfolded over 9 days each autumn. The process began with the Lesser Mysteries, held in the spring near Athens, a kind of preparatory cleansing for those who wished to be initiated later. But the main event, the Greater Mysteries, commenced with a breathtaking public spectacle. Thousands of initiates would gather in Athens, then walk the sacred road to Eleusis in a solemn, singing procession. They carried sacred objects in sealed containers, and among them walked a statue of the young god Iacchus, a personification of the ritual cry itself. The journey was a pilgrimage in every sense, a physical hardship that mirrored an inner journey. Upon reaching the coast, all participants would undergo a ritual purification, washing themselves in the sea while leading a sacrificial pig to be cleansed alongside them. This was followed by a day of fasting, a deliberate emptying, making space for what was to come. The air must have been electric with a mixture of exhaustion, anticipation, and profound reverence. Yet all of this, the procession, the bathing, the fasting, was merely the public face of the ceremony, the part everyone could see and talk about. It was the prelude. For the climax occurred behind the massive, sealed doors of the Telesterion, the great hall at Eleusis. Here, in utter darkness broken only by sudden, dramatic flashes of light, the initiates experienced the heart of the mystery. What exactly transpired in that hall is the secret that was never, ever written down. Ancient sources only hint at things shown and things said. Participants might have witnessed a sacred play reenacting the myth of Demeter and Persephone, or been shown holy relics like an ear of wheat. They likely drank the kykeon, a special barley and mint potion. But the true nature of the revelation, the moment of epiphany that left initiates weeping and trembling with awe, died with each generation, passed only from hierophant to hierophant. The penalty for revealing these secrets was severe and unambiguous: death and the confiscation of one's entire property. And in over 1,000 years, despite countless participants from all walks of life, that penalty seems never to have been applied because the secret was never broken. This was not a secret kept out of fear, but out of a shared, sacred understanding so powerful it forged a bond of silence stronger than any law. The heart of this profound silence was a building. The Telesterion at Eleusis was not a temple in the traditional sense, with a statue to admire from a distance. It was a vast, windowless hall, a cavernous box of stone and timber built for a single, overwhelming purpose: to hold the initiates and stage the revelation. Imagine a space capable of seating thousands of people in concentric rows on stepped terraces, all facing inward, all plunged into a total, consuming darkness. The architecture itself was a tool for manipulation, designed to strip away the outside world and focus every sense on the ritual drama about to unfold. In that absolute blackness, your world would shrink to the sound of your own breathing and the shared anticipation of the crowd. Then a sudden, shocking blaze of light. Ancient accounts speak of a great fire flaring in the center of the hall, casting monstrous, dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating for a fleeting instant the face of the hierophant, the high priest who was the showman and guardian of the secret. The effect would have been jarring, even terrifying, a visual shock to the system perfectly timed to open the mind. Along with the fire came sound, a deep, resonant chanting, rhythmic and hypnotic, filling the hall with vibrations you could feel in your chest. And in these moments of heightened sensory overload, sacred objects were displayed. Sources hint at a single ear of wheat being held aloft in silence, a simple, potent symbol of life emerging from decay. Some scholars suggest a dramatic reenactment of the myth, the sacred search of Demeter for her lost daughter Persephone, played out in this shadowy theater. The combination was masterful: darkness, then blinding light, haunting chant, and potent symbol. This was no lecture. It was a meticulously crafted experience designed to bypass the intellect and strike directly at the emotional core, to create a moment of personal epiphany about life, death, and rebirth. The secret of Eleusis was not a password or a complicated doctrine to be memorized. It was a feeling, a transformative shock of understanding delivered in the dark heart of the Telesterion. A feeling so powerful that those who experienced it believed they knew what awaited them after death, and they carried that certainty, wrapped in a vow of silence for the rest of their lives. That transformative moment in the dark hall was preceded by a deliberate physical preparation. Before entering the Telesterion, every initiate consumed a special ritual drink known as the kykeon. Our ancient sources are clear and surprisingly mundane about its recipe: a simple mixture of water, barley, and a touch of pennyroyal mint. On the surface, this seems like a humble, even rustic beverage, a peasant's meal in a cup. But within the context of the mysteries, every ingredient was a potent symbol. The barley came directly from the grain of Demeter herself, the very substance of her gift to humanity. The pennyroyal mint was not just for flavor, it was a medicinal herb known to the ancient world for soothing stomach ailments and regulating female cycles, subtly tying the drink to themes of fertility and bodily purification. Consuming the kykeon was an act of literal incorporation, taking the essence of the goddess into one's own body, preparing the vessel for the revelation to come. This act broke the sacred fast, but it may have done far more than simply sate hunger. Here we encounter one of the most fascinating and controversial theories in modern scholarship. Some researchers, like the classicist Karl Ruck, have proposed a startling possibility. They note that barley, especially when stored in damp conditions, is highly susceptible to infection by a fungus called ergot. This same fungus is the natural source from which the psychedelic compound LSD was first isolated in the 20th century. If the barley used to brew the kykeon was deliberately or accidentally contaminated with ergot, the drink would have been a powerful psychoactive agent. The effects of such a brew could include vivid visual hallucinations, a profound sense of unity with the divine, and intense emotional experiences. In the pitch-black, emotionally charged atmosphere of the Telesterion, with chanting echoing and light flashing, such a substance could have catalyzed the ultimate mystical experience. Initiates might truly believe they were seeing the afterlife, communing with the goddess, or witnessing the birth of the divine child. This theory is compelling because it offers a physiological mechanism for the unanimous reports of awe and life-changing vision. It suggests the Hierophants, perhaps through generations of careful observation, mastered a form of sacred pharmacology, using the natural world to open a door in the human mind. Of course, this remains a theory, and many scholars caution against reducing a 2,000-year spiritual tradition to a chemical reaction. The power of ritual, symbolism, and extreme expectation cannot be discounted. Yet the possibility lingers, a tantalizing hint that the boundary between the divine and the biochemical might have been thinner at Eleusis than we ever imagined. Was the kykeon a simple sacred token, or was it the key that unlocked the mind's inner sanctum, allowing each person to witness their own personal truth in the dancing shadows? The secret of the drink died with its last sip. The power to orchestrate this profound experience rested in the hands of a single man. He was known as the Hierophant, a title that translates to the one who shows the sacred things. In the swirling darkness of the Telesterion, he was the master of ceremonies, the conductor of awe, and the living voice of Demeter herself. This was not a role one could apply for or earn through scholarship alone. The position of Hierophant was a sacred inheritance passed down through the noble Eumolpidi family, who traced their lineage back to the mythical founder of the mysteries, Eumolpos. For over 1,000 years, this one family held the ultimate spiritual authority at Eleusis, a continuity that itself became part of the ritual's profound power. It meant the secrets were not just ideas, but a living tradition carried in the blood and breath of a specific lineage, father to son, generation after generation. When an initiate looked upon the Hierophant in the flash of the sacred fire, they were not just seeing a priest, they were witnessing a direct link to the very origins of the rite. His appearance was designed to inspire awe and signify his unique status. Ancient descriptions and vase paintings suggest he wore extraordinarily rich purple-dyed robes, a color associated with royalty and the divine. His hair was often dressed in a distinctive style, and he likely carried a scepter, but his true power was not in his regalia, it was in his voice and his actions. His paramount duty, performed only once a year in that hall, was to reveal the hierer, the most sacred objects of the cult. While we do not know precisely what these objects were, they were stored in a special inner sanctum and were believed to hold the very essence of the goddesses. At the climactic moment, the Hierophant would bring them forth. He did not merely hold them up for viewing, he enacted them, Through a sacred chant, a dramatic cry, or a carefully spoken narrative, he performed the central mystery. He made the invisible visible, he gave form to the formless divine. In that act, the myth of Demeter's grief and Persephone's return was not just a story from the past, it became a present, living reality for every trembling soul in the room. The Hierophant was the bridge between the human and the divine, the interpreter who translated eternal truth into a single, shattering moment of understanding that would define the rest of an initiate's life. To see him perform this duty was to witness the secret made flesh, a privilege bought with a vow of silence that would last until death. This divine drama, performed in flashes of light and shadow, drew its power from a story known to every Greek child. The myth of Demeter and Persephone was not mere entertainment. It was the foundational script, the sacred blueprint for everything experienced at Eleusis. It begins not with a goddess in her glory, but with a daughter gathering flowers. Persephone, young and radiant, is in a sun-drenched meadow when the earth itself cracks open. From the chasm charges Hades, god of the dead, in his chariot drawn by dark horses. He seizes Persephone and plunges back into the depths, leaving only a fading cry and a few scattered blossoms. Her mother, Demeter, hears that cry from across the world. In that instant, the goddess of abundance is transformed. She tears her hair, casts aside her divine splendor, and disguises herself as an old mortal woman. For 9 days and nights she roams the earth, frantic and disconsolate, holding a torch in each hand, searching without rest. Her grief is a physical force that begins to warp the world. In her despair, she withdraws her blessing from the land. Plants wither, seeds refuse to sprout, and a terrible famine grips the earth. Mortals starve, and even the gods begin to worry, for without human offerings, their own power fades. This is the first devastating lesson of the myth. The grief of a mother is so profound it can stop life itself. The world becomes a mirror of her inner desolation, a barren landscape reflecting a broken heart. Eventually, the sun god Helios, who sees all, reveals the truth to Demeter. Her daughter is in the underworld, taken as bride by Hades. Demeter's sorrow turns to fury. She declares that she will never restore fertility to the earth until she sees her daughter again. The crisis is total. Finally, the king of the gods, Zeus, is forced to intervene. He sends the messenger god Hermes down to the realm of Hades to negotiate Persephone's release. Hades agrees, but not before tricking Persephone into eating a few seeds of a pomegranate, the food of the dead. This simple act binds her to him forever. Because she has consumed food in his realm, she must return to it. A compromise is struck, one that would forever define the cycles of nature. For each pomegranate seed she ate, Persephone would spend 1 month of the year in the underworld with Hades. The rest of the year she could return to the light and to her mother's embrace. The moment Persephone emerges, Demeter's joy erupts. Flowers burst from the ground, trees leaf out, and the barren fields turn green and golden with grain. This is the second triumphant lesson. The return of the daughter brings the return of life, but the cycle is now eternal. Every year when Persephone descends, Demeter mourns and the world enters autumn and winter. Every year her return brings the explosion of spring and summer. For the initiates at Eleusis, this was not a story about distant gods. It was the ultimate metaphor made real. Persephone's descent was their own fear of death. Demeter's grief was the pain of every human loss, and the joyous reunion that was the promise, the secret knowledge that from the deepest darkness, a return to light was not just possible, but guaranteed by the very rhythm of the cosmos. The ritual in the Telesterion allowed them to walk that emotional path themselves, to feel the despair and then the ecstatic relief, to internalize the truth that the seed must fall into the dark earth before it can ever rise again. Yet the power of Demeter was not confined to the grand, mixed-gender spectacle of Eleusis. Her influence flowed through a different, more intimate channel, one that empowered half the population in a way almost unheard of in the ancient world. Across the Greek city-states from Athens to Sparta and far beyond, women gathered every autumn for a festival of their own, the Thesmophoria. This was no minor observance. It was a widespread, state-sponsored, and crucially important event dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, but with one defining rule: no men were allowed. For 3 days, women left their homes, their husbands, and their families to camp together on a hillside sanctuary, taking control of civic and religious space in a profound temporary reversal of daily life. The purpose of this secretive gathering was staggeringly ambitious: to guarantee the fertility of the entire land and the continued well-being of the community. The fate of the harvest, and by extension the survival of the city, was placed directly in the hands of its women. This was female-centric power, sanctioned by the state but governed by its own ancient, mysterious laws. The festival followed a strict, symbolic 3-day structure, each phase a step in a powerful ritual drama. The first day was called the Kathodos, the descent. Before the main festival began, a few chosen women, known as the Antaltrii or Balers, would perform a dangerous and ritually charged task. They descended into deep, snake-inhabited chasms in the earth, which were believed to be direct passages to the underworld. From these pits, they retrieved the decayed remains of piglets and pine branches that had been thrown down during a festival the previous year. This act was profoundly symbolic. The pig was a sacred animal to Demeter, associated with fertility. The decayed matter, now mixed with the seeds of new life, represented the mingling of death and regeneration. By bringing this potent substance up from the underworld, the women were literally drawing up the power of fertility from the realm of Persephone and Hades, enacting in reverse the daughter's return to the world of the living. They would then place this sacred compost on the altars of Demeter, and later mix it with the seed grain to be sown, blessing the next harvest at its very source. The second day, the Nesteia, was one of fasting and mourning. The women reenacted the grief of Demeter after the loss of Persephone. They sat on the ground, perhaps on mats of certain plants believed to inhibit fertility, and abstained from all food. This was a day of solemnity and shared sorrow, a collective performance of loss that mirrored the barren winter landscape. By willingly entering a state of emptiness and desolation, they purified themselves and created a sacred vacuum, a necessary void that would make the renewal of the next day possible. The fasting was not merely a hardship, it was a deliberate, sympathetic magic, a way of aligning their own bodies and spirits with the goddess's cycle to ensure its completion. The climax came on the third day, the Kalygneia, which means fair birth or beautiful offspring. The mood shifted dramatically from mourning to joyous celebration. The fasting ended, the women rose from the ground, and the retrieved sacred compost was ritually mixed with the seed corn. Feasting, laughter, and likely ribald jokes filled the air, all acts believed to promote fertility. This day celebrated the return of Persephone and the triumphant fertility of Demeter, now channeled directly into the community's future sustenance. The women, through their ritual actions, had become the vessels and the agents of this divine power. They had journeyed to the underworld in spirit, shared the goddess's grief, and now presided over the promise of new life. In doing so, they performed an essential civic duty, one that men were completely excluded from and could not replicate. The secrecy of their rites was absolute, guarded by the same severe social penalties that protected Eleusis. What exactly was said or done in those hillside camps remained a mystery to the other half of society, a powerful reminder that in the realm of the life-giving earth, female knowledge and female ritual held the ultimate keys. The most potent moment of the Thesmophoria was not the fasting or the feasting, but the retrieval of something unspeakable from the dark. Months before the main festival, in a separate preliminary rite, women would gather for a startling act of preparation. Live piglets and special cakes, often molded into phallic shapes, were cast down into deep, snake-filled pits known as megara. These were not simple holes in the ground. They were sacred chasms believed to be direct doorways to the underworld realm of Persephone and Hades. The piglets and cakes were left there in that symbolic womb of the earth to decompose for weeks or even months. They were offerings, but not in the usual sense of a gift given to a god. This was a deliberate surrender of life and fertility into the realm of death itself. The symbolism here is raw and profound. The pig in the ancient Greek world was a universal symbol of fertility and abundance, closely associated with Demeter. Its plump, prolific nature made it a perfect stand-in for the life force of the land. The phallic cakes reinforced this theme, a blatant symbol of generative power. By throwing these symbols of vibrant life into the pits, the women were performing a kind of sacred burial. They were entrusting the essence of fertility to the earth, to the goddess below, allowing it to undergo the necessary transformation that all life must face. They were, in effect, planting the seed of next year's abundance in the darkest soil imaginable. Then, during the Thesmophoria itself, came the dramatic reversal. Selected women, the balers, would descend into those same pits. Imagine the courage this required, lowering themselves into a dark, confined space, likely home to snakes, which were themselves chthonic creatures linked to the underworld. Their task was to gather the now rotted remains, the bones of the piglets and the crumbled, decayed cakes. This retrieved substance was not seen as filth. It was sacred compost, a physical amalgamation of life and death, now charged with otherworldly power. This compost was then placed upon the altars of Demeter. Later, it would be ritually mixed with the seed corn, the very grain that would be sown into the fields for the coming year's harvest. The ritual logic is breathtakingly complete. They took symbols of fertility, subjected them to the process of death and decay in the underworld, and then reintegrated that transformed substance back into the cycle of life. The message was clear, and it was the same message whispered at Eleusis. New life cannot spring from purity alone. It must be forged in the darkness. The bountiful harvest, the continuity of the community, depended on this brave, messy, and deeply symbolic act of retrieving hope from the pit. The profound rituals of Eleusis and the Thesmophoria created a powerful spiritual template, but this template was not rigid. Demeter's worship was a living, breathing faith that adapted to the soil in which it was planted. To think of it as a single, uniform religion centered only on Athens is to miss its true, sprawling nature. From the rocky coasts of Asia Minor to the fertile plains of Sicily, communities developed their own intimate relationships with the two goddesses, weaving the core myth into the very fabric of their local landscape. Take the sanctuary of Demeter at Knidos, a stunning coastal city in what is now Turkey. Here, archaeologists have uncovered a different kind of sacred space. Instead of a vast, windowless hall like the Telesterion, the sanctuary consists of a series of small, elegant dining rooms built into terraces overlooking the Aegean Sea. The finds here tell a story of communal feasting in the goddess's honor. Hundreds of drinking cups, plates, and animal bones suggest that initiation or worship at Knidos was a more social, perhaps even luxurious affair. Participants likely shared a sacred meal together, bonding as a community while gazing out at the sea, linking Demeter's bounty of the land with the maritime wealth of their city. The ritual focused on shared sustenance, a tangible experience of the goddess's gift. Then there were the mysteries at Andania, in the region of Messenia in the Peloponnese. Though lesser known than Eleusis, they were ancient and deeply respected. A remarkable stone inscription from around 91 BCE preserves a detailed rulebook for conducting these rites. It meticulously dictates everything from the purity requirements for participants to the specific clothing the priestesses must wear, down to the exact type of wreaths allowed. This incredible document reveals a cult with its own strict local hierarchy and traditions, every bit as organized and serious as its famous Athenian counterpart, but tailored to its own community's sense of order and propriety. The core promise of blessed afterlife remained, but the path to it was governed by distinctly local rules. But perhaps the most powerful geographical fusion of myth and place occurred on the island of Sicily. For many ancient Greeks, Sicily was not just a colony, it was the actual stage for the central drama of the myth. Tradition held that the meadow where Persephone was gathering flowers when Hades abducted her was located near the city of Enna in the very heart of the island. Even more strikingly, near the city of Syracuse, there was a place called the Cyane Spring, where locals said the earth had split open for Hades' chariot and where a river nymph tried in vain to stop him. For Sicilian Greeks, the myth was not a distant story from Attica, it was their local geology. Their worship of Demeter and Persephone, therefore, carried a unique intensity. They were honoring goddesses whose most traumatic and triumphant moments had physically shaped their own homeland. Their rituals were an act of deep, localized memory, connecting their daily lives in a volcanic, fertile land directly to the epic narrative of loss and return. In Sicily, every spring blossom could be a reminder of Persephone's fate, and every harvest a personal celebration of her temporary homecoming. This incredible adaptability, from the seaside dining clubs of Knidos to the rule-bound precision of Andania and the mythic landscapes of Sicily, shows the true strength of Demeter's cult. It provided a universal framework of hope, but allowed each community to find its own doorway into the mystery, rooted in their own earth, their own sea, and their own understanding of the sacred. The goddess who made the grain grow also held the keys to the world below. We have seen Demeter as the grieving mother and the source of life, but to understand her fully, we must confront a more formidable title, Demeter Cychthonia. Cychthon means earth, but not the sunlit soil of the field. This is the deep, dark, subterranean earth, the realm of roots, graves, and the dead. Demeter Cychthonia was the goddess of the underworld aspect, a dimension of her power as essential as her gift of grain. As the mother of Persephone, who became queen of the dead, Demeter's influence did not stop at the grave's edge. She presided over the most profound boundary in human experience, the line between life and death itself. This was not a contradiction, but the completion of a terrifying and beautiful logic. The same process that governed her domain above ground governed the fate of every soul. Think of the seed. For a plant to live, the seed must first be buried. It must surrender its form, breaking down in the cold, dark soil. From that seeming death, that decay, new life pushes upward toward the sun. Demeter Cychthonia embodied that first, necessary phase, the descent into darkness. She was present not only in the sprouting stalk, but in the moment the seed was placed in the earth, and by extension, the moment a human body was laid in the ground. This made her rituals profoundly resonant. When women at the Thesmophoria cast piglets into the sacred pits, they were making an offering to Demeter Cychthonia, entrusting the spark of life to her underworld realm for transformation. The initiates at Eleusis, through their symbolic journey into the dark Telesterion and back into the light, were reenacting this very cycle with their own souls as the seed. The promise of Eleusis was not a denial of death, but a revelation about its nature. The mysteries taught that death was not an eternal end, but a necessary phase of descent and decay, supervised by the goddess herself, from which a new form of existence, a blessed afterlife, could emerge. Demeter Cychthonia offered a chilling yet comforting truth. The darkness of the earth was not a prison, but a womb. The decay of the body, like the decay of the seed, was not a final corruption, but the beginning of a sacred process. To worship her was to acknowledge the terrifying power of the deep earth, while holding fast to the hope that she, the mother of the queen below, would guide what was placed within it toward a form of rebirth we can scarcely imagine. This profound connection between seed and soul hinged on a single, unrepeatable moment in the dark. At the climax of the Eleusinian ritual, the Hierophant would reveal the hierer, the most sacred objects. What were these things whose sight was worth a vow of silence on pain of death? No initiate ever wrote it down, but fragments of text and art offer us tantalizing, ambiguous clues. One of the most persistent hints comes from later Christian writers who sought to discredit the pagan rites. They claimed the ultimate revelation was something shockingly simple, a single, perfect ear of wheat cut in silence. If true, the power of this gesture is staggering. In that context, after hours of darkness and sensory deprivation, to see a single stalk held aloft in a sudden flash of firelight would not be mundane. It would be the entire cosmos in miniature, the entire promise of the mysteries made visible, life, death, and rebirth held in the hand of the god-like priest. Another possibility, suggested by some ancient references and the practices of similar fertility cults, is that the object was a phallus, a symbol of raw generative power. This would tie directly to the women's rituals of the Thesmophoria and to the fundamental drive of the cult to ensure the fertility of crops, animals, and people. To reveal such an object would be to show the primal force behind Demeter's bounty, stripped of metaphor. Yet other scholars point to art showing the goddess Demeter herself seated in a temple-like structure, suggesting a sacred statue or idol may have been the central focus. Perhaps the Hierophant did not show an object but enacted a sacred tableau, a living picture of the mother and daughter reunited. And then there is the most elusive possibility of all, that the great secret was not a thing to be seen, but a truth to be heard, or even a profound collective silence to be experienced. The power may have resided in a specific, potent phrase spoken only at that moment, a password for the soul. Or perhaps after the frenzy of light and sound, the Hierophant imposed a total, awe-filled silence, allowing each initiate's own epiphany to crystallize in the quiet. The truth is, we will likely never know the exact nature of the Hiera, but that may be the point. The immense, enduring power of the mysteries did not come from the object itself, whether it was wheat, wood, or stone. The power was in the act of revelation, the long-awaited unveiling within that perfectly staged sacred theater. The value was in the shared journey toward that moment, the fasting, the procession, the fear, and the anticipation. By the time the Hierophant raised his hand, every person in that hall was psychologically primed to receive a world-altering truth. The object, whatever it was, became a lightning rod for that collective, transformative energy. Its meaning was not inherent, it was bestowed upon it by 2,000 years of belief, ritual, and desperate human hope. The secret was powerful precisely because it was secret, because it was earned, and because it belonged fully and completely to the one who witnessed it in the dark and then chose for the rest of their life to say nothing at all. That transformative vision in the Telesterion was not the end of the journey. For many, it was only the first step. The Eleusinian Mysteries operated on a tiered system of initiation, a carefully structured path that deepened both knowledge and commitment over time. An individual's first experience at Eleusis granted them the title of mystes, which simply means an initiate, one who has been closed or whose eyes and lips are shut. This was a perfect description of their initial state. They had participated in the public procession, the purification, the fasting, and had finally entered the great hall. They had witnessed the sacred drama, heard the chants, and seen the flashes of light. Yet as a mysts, their understanding was intentionally incomplete, their experience perhaps more emotional than intellectual. They had been brought to the threshold of the mystery, but the full weight of its meaning might still feel just out of reach. This first initiation was powerful and life-changing, but it was also, in a sense, an introduction. It bound the individual to the cult with a solemn vow of secrecy, but it also left them with a yearning, a sense that there was more to see, more to know. The experience was designed to create a desire for deeper communion, a pull to return, and so many did. Those who came back to Eleusis for a second initiation, at least 1 year later, ascended to the highest rank, that of the epops. This word carries immense significance. It translates to the one who has seen, or more precisely, the one who witnesses. This was not a repetition of the first experience. It was a different and reportedly more profound level of revelation. While the mysts participated in the rites, the epops was believed to witness something even more sacred. Ancient sources are, as always, frustratingly vague, but they hint that the epops may have been shown additional, more potent sacred objects or been privy to a further elaboration of the myth's meaning. Some theories suggest that while the mysts experienced the story of Demeter's grief, the epops witnessed the culmination, the sacred marriage or hieros gomos between the goddess and a divine consort, symbolizing the ultimate act of cosmic fertility and regeneration. This tiered system served multiple brilliant purposes. First, it created layers of secrecy within the community itself. You could be a devout member, a mysts, and still not know what an epops knew. This internal hierarchy fostered a sense of ongoing pursuit and elite status, strengthening the bonds of the inner circle. Second, it demanded a greater commitment of time, resources, and faith. To travel to Eleusis once was a major undertaking. To do so twice demonstrated profound devotion. This weeded out the casually curious and solidified a core of deeply committed adherents. Finally, it mirrored the core agricultural metaphor of the cult itself. The first initiation was like planting the seed, the act of faith. The second initiation, the state of being an epops, was the harvest, the full fruition of understanding that only comes with time and return. To be an epops was to have seen the full cycle, from the descent into darkness to the emergence into a more complete light. It was the final seal on a promise, turning a powerful memory into a permanent, lived truth about the nature of existence itself. The true power of a secret lies not in what it hides, but in what it promises to reveal. For the initiates of Eleusis, the ultimate reward was not a momentary vision, but a permanent change in destiny. In the common Greek imagination, the afterlife was a bleak and dreary prospect. The realm of Hades was a shadowy, joyless place where the souls of the dead, mere shades, existed in a state of listless, colorless monotony. It was an existence stripped of feeling, memory, and hope, a grim fate that awaited nearly everyone, hero and commoner alike. This was the widespread, chilling belief. But the mysteries offered a radical, luminous alternative. They promised the initiated something profoundly different, a blessed existence in the Elysian fields, the paradise reserved for heroes and the favorites of the gods. This was not a vague hope, it was a specific guarantee embedded in the very foundation of the cult. The ancient Homeric hymn to Demeter, composed in honor of the goddess, makes this promise explicit. It states, quote, "Happy is he among men upon earth who has seen these mysteries, but he who is uninitiated and has no part in them never has lot of like good things once he is dead, down in the darkness and gloom." End quote. The contrast could not be starker. On one side, darkness and gloom for the uninitiated. On the other, a lot of good things, a portion of bliss for those who had undergone the rites. This was the primary draw, the magnetic force that pulled people from every corner of the Greek world to make that arduous pilgrimage. A wealthy Athenian general, a poor farmer from the islands, a philosopher from Asia Minor, and an enslaved person who had been granted permission by their master, all could stand together in the Telesterion. Their social status, their wealth, their power in the world of the living, all of it was irrelevant in that dark hall. What mattered was the shared experience, the shared vision, and the shared ticket to a blessed eternity. The mysteries democratized salvation in a way few other institutions of the ancient world ever did. It offered a universal hope, a tangible answer to the deepest human fear, the fear of oblivion. The initiate did not just learn a secret about the grain, they were given a map for their own soul, a certainty that their journey did not end in the grey fields of Hades, but in the sunlit meadows of Elysium. This was the priceless trade, a vow of silence in this life for a guarantee of light in the next. This promise of paradise did not remain a secret of the Greek world. As the Roman Republic expanded its power, absorbing cultures and gods with a pragmatic hunger, it encountered the profound power of Demeter's mysteries. They did not destroy this foreign cult. They did something far more telling. They adopted it, renamed it, and made it their own. The Greek Demeter was seamlessly assimilated into the Roman goddess Ceres, from whose name we get our word cereal. While Ceres already existed in the Roman pantheon as an agricultural deity, the encounter with the Eleusinian rites transformed her. She absorbed Demeter's deeper mythology, her grief for a lost daughter now named Proserpina, and most importantly, her promise of an blessed afterlife. The Romans, ever practical, saw the immense political and spiritual utility in this powerful Greek export. By the 3rd century BCE, they had formally imported the cult, establishing their own version of the Eleusinian Mysteries right in the heart of the empire. They were held in honor of Ceres and Proserpina just outside Rome's sacred boundary on the Aventine Hill. This was not a marginal, fringe practice. It became an official part of the Roman state religion, supervised by priests and priestesses who were often drawn from the highest echelons of society. The Roman Senate itself took a direct interest, legislating on matters of the cult's finances and organization. But the Roman adoption went beyond mere state sponsorship. They integrated the mysteries into the very fabric of their elite identity. For a time, initiation into the rites of Ceres became a prerequisite for holding certain ancient and prestigious priesthoods within Rome. To lead the state religion, you first had to be initiated into this mystery cult of Greek origin. This is a staggering level of integration. The secrets of Demeter, once the guarded treasure of a small Attic town, were now a formal stepping stone for Roman political and religious authority. The rituals were likely adapted, Latinized in their language and perhaps simplified in their ceremony, but the core promise remained intact. Why would the conquering Romans embrace a conquered people's secret rites with such fervor? The answer lies in the universal currency of the cult's offer. The Roman elite, for all their military might and civil engineering, faced the same fundamental human dread as a Greek farmer, the fear of death's emptiness. The mysteries provided a concrete, prestigious, and state-sanctioned answer. Furthermore, by controlling the cult, Rome demonstrated its cultural sophistication, showing it could absorb the best spiritual technologies of the Greeks while layering them with Roman order and imperial purpose. The cult of Ceres became a tool for unifying the expanding empire's diverse populace, offering a common spiritual hope that transcended local gods. It also served as a powerful piece of soft diplomacy, a cultural bridge to the Greek cities of the eastern Mediterranean that Rome now ruled. By worshipping Ceres with rites recognizably borrowed from Eleusis, Rome signaled that it was not just a military overlord, but a civilized heir to Hellenic tradition. The whispered secrets from a dark hall in Greece had become, centuries later, a pillar of the world's greatest empire, proving that the hunger for a hopeful answer to life's final question knows no borders. But whispers, no matter how ancient, can be silenced by a decree. The unbroken chain of the mysteries, stretching back into the mists of the Bronze Age, did not simply fade away. It was severed by the deliberate hand of a new world order. By the late 4th century AD, the Roman Empire was a profoundly changed place. Christianity, once a persecuted faith, was now the official state religion, championed by emperors who saw pagan rites not as venerable tradition, but as dangerous superstition and idolatry that threatened the soul of the empire. The man who would deliver the final blow was Emperor Theodosius I, a ruler remembered by history as the Great for his role in solidifying Christian orthodoxy. In the year 391 AD, Theodosius issued a sweeping series of edicts that effectively outlawed pagan worship across the empire. All temples were to be closed, all public sacrifices, the lifeblood of traditional Roman religion, were forbidden. Participation in pagan rituals was declared illegal, punishable by the state. This was not a suggestion, it was an imperial command backed by the full force of the Roman military and bureaucracy. The target was not just any cult, it was the entire old world and its gods. And standing proudly among them with its 2,000-year history was the sanctuary at Eleusis. We do not know the exact date of its final ceremony. Historical clues point to the year 392 as the likely last gasp. Picture that final, furtive procession. The initiates walking the sacred road from Athens, not in the thousands as in centuries past, but perhaps in a fearful, determined handful. The Hierophant, the last of his ancient lineage, preparing to perform the rites one final time, knowing he was breaking the emperor's law. The sacred objects brought out in the Telesterion, not to the awe of a crowd, but in the shadows under the threat of discovery. They would have performed the rituals knowing they were committing a crime against the state, that the torch they carried was now an act of defiance. And then it was over. The sanctuary was abandoned to the imperial authorities. What happened next is a dark echo of the myth itself. Just as Hades descended to claim Persephone, soldiers and perhaps zealous Christian monks descended upon Eleusis. They did not just lock the doors. In a calculated act of spiritual annihilation, they sought to desecrate the very heart of the mystery. According to later historians, the invaders targeted the sacred inner sanctum. They likely smashed the ancient cult statues of Demeter and Persephone. They may have looted or destroyed the Hieria, those most holy objects whose sight had been worth a life's vow of silence. The great Telesterion, that windowless chamber of awe, was left to the elements, its roof eventually collapsing, its stepped seats buried under soil and time. The sacred pits of the Thesmophoria were filled in or forgotten. The whispers that had echoed in that hall for nearly 2,000 years were replaced by an absolute crushing silence. A living tradition that had comforted millions, from illiterate farmers to Roman emperors, was extinguished not by a loss of faith, but by the stroke of a pen in a distant capital. The seed was not planted that winter, and no one returned to see if it would ever sprout again. The silence imposed by imperial decree lasted for over 1,000 years. Eleusis became a forgotten mound of earth and marble, its secrets buried under layers of soil and legend. Then, in the late 19th century, the spades of archaeologists began to turn the earth, not to enforce silence but to listen for whispers. They were not searching for a written manual of the rites. They knew none could exist. Instead, they sought the physical bones of the mystery, the architecture and objects left behind when the last initiate walked away. What they uncovered at the site, piece by painstaking piece, confirmed the staggering scale and profound wealth of the cult that once thrived there. The most imposing discovery was the massive foundation of the Telesterion itself. Excavators cleared away centuries of debris to reveal the outline of a vast, almost square hall with a grid of stone column bases still in place. This was the architectural proof of the ancient descriptions. Measuring roughly 55 meters on each side, the hall could indeed have held thousands of people. The stepped seating carved into the rock around its edges gave physical form to the accounts of initiates sitting in concentric rows. At the center of the hall, archaeologists found the remains of a special inner chamber, the anactoron or palace. This was the Holy of Holies, the sealed room where the sacred objects, the Hieria, were stored throughout the year, only to be brought forth by the Hierophant on that one sacred night. The sheer size of this building, repeatedly enlarged over centuries from a small shrine to a colossal state-funded project, speaks louder than any text to the cult's enduring and growing importance. This was not a hidden cave for a few devotees. It was a monumental public works project designed to accommodate the spiritual hunger of the entire Greek world. Beyond the Great Hall, another find tapped directly into the mythic geography of the site. On the slopes above the sanctuary, excavators identified a natural cave, later enhanced with masonry. This was almost certainly the Plutonian, a sacred cave dedicated to Hades, also known as Pluto. Ancient sources describe this as the very spot where Hades emerged to abduct Persephone and later where he returned to his realm. For the initiates, this was not a symbolic location. It was the actual entrance to the underworld, physically present at the sanctuary. To stand before it during the rites would have made the myth terrifyingly immediate, blurring the line between story and tangible reality. The ground also yielded more humble, yet equally telling evidence. Deep, rock-cut pits were discovered, matching descriptions of the megara used in the women's Thesmophoria. While these particular pits at Eleusis may have had a slightly different ritual function, their presence confirms the practice of using chasms to connect with the chthonic powers of the earth. Perhaps most moving are the countless votive offerings pulled from the soil. These were not the grand statues of emperors, but personal gifts from ordinary people. Tiny clay figurines of piglets, the animals sacred to Demeter and cast into the pits, miniature torches, replicas of those carried in the night procession. Small models of baskets likely holding symbolic grain, and everywhere terracotta plaques depicting Demeter and Persephone, often shown handing a worshipper a stalk of wheat or a poppy flower. These objects are the silent prayers of individuals, the physical tokens of gratitude or pleas for favor left by farmers, mothers, soldiers, and enslaved people who had experienced the mysteries or hoped for the goddess's blessing. The sheer volume of these finds, spanning centuries, tells us that the cult was not just for the elite. It was woven into the daily fabric of life for countless anonymous souls. The archaeology cannot tell us the secret words spoken in the dark. It cannot replay the blinding flash of light or the tone of the hierophant's chant. But it gives us the stage, the props, and the audience's discarded tokens. It confirms that Eleusis was, for nearly 2 millennia, a bustling, wealthy, and constantly renovated center of pilgrimage. The stone foundations prove the scale of the belief. The Plutonian anchors the myth to the very rock. The piglet figurines and tiny torches give voice to the hopes of the multitude. Together, they form a chorus of silent witnesses, affirming that what happened here was not a fringe myth or a minor local festival, but one of the most significant and enduring spiritual enterprises of the ancient world. Yet the stones of Eleusis are not the only silent witnesses left behind. To see the emotional texture of these rites, we must turn from the silent ruins to vibrant, frozen art. In villas buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and in grand tombs across the Greek world, stunning mosaics and frescoes have survived, offering a tantalizing, if ambiguous, visual commentary on the mysteries. Perhaps the most famous of these is not from Eleusis itself, but from a luxurious home in Pompeii known as the Villa of the Mysteries. An entire room is adorned with a breathtaking, life-sized fresco that wraps around the walls, depicting a series of enigmatic, charged scenes. Here we see not gods, but human figures engaged in what many scholars believe is a ritual sequence, possibly an initiation into the cult of Dionysus, which shared similarities with Demeter's rites. A young woman, the likely initiate, sits with her head in her nurse's lap, an image of anxiety and preparation. Another figure uncovers a sacred basket. A winged being raises a whip while a dancing figure holds a ritual rod. The emotional progression is palpable, moving from trepidation to ecstatic revelation. The whip is not an instrument of punishment, but likely a ritual tool for purification, a symbolic striking away of impurity before entering a sacred state. The basket, or Sister Mystica, was a common symbol in mystery cults, a sealed container holding the sacred objects that could not be seen by the uninitiated. To unveil it was to reveal the core of the secret. The figure's expressions range from solemn focus to transported joy, mapping the initiate's internal journey from fear to awe. Similarly, a magnificent mosaic from a royal tomb in Amphipolis, Greece, dated to the 4th century BCE, shows the abduction of Persephone by Hades. The artist captures the violent, swirling motion of the moment, with Persephone's robes flying and her arm outstretched in a mix of terror and surrender. This scene, placed in a tomb, is profoundly significant. It directly connects the myth of descent into the underworld with the human experience of death, suggesting the deceased is undergoing a similar, divinely patterned journey. The presence of the god Hermes, guide of souls, watching calmly from the side, reinforces this idea, offering a promise of order within the chaos. These artworks are not photographs of the rituals, they are interpretations layered with symbolism. The veil in many depictions represents the boundary between the profane and the sacred, which is lifted during initiation. The Eleusis, a staff tipped with a pine cone, symbolizes fertility and divine frenzy. The panicked white of a horse or the serene gaze of a divine observer all contribute to a visual language of transformation. They show us that the experience was understood as a profound emotional arc, a visceral passage through fear, purification, and finally, ecstatic liberation. While we cannot say for certain that the Pompeii fresco depicts Eleusinian rites specifically, its power lies in its universal portrayal of initiation's core, the vulnerable human stepping from the known into the mysterious and emerging forever changed. These silent images, preserved by ash and time, give color and form to the whispers that once filled the dark hall at Eleusis. They remind us that the true secret was not a static object, but a transformative journey painted on the human soul. The silent frescoes and buried altars were not the final word. 2,000 years after the last sacred fire was extinguished at Eleusis, the whispers of Demeter are finding new voices. In a world far removed from ancient city-states, a remarkable dual revival is underway, one driven by scholarly curiosity and another by spiritual yearning. Academics and modern practitioners are, in their own ways, attempting to reach back across the centuries to touch the essence of the mysteries, confronting an immense and fascinating paradox. How do you reconstruct a ritual whose very power depended on it never being fully known? In university halls and at international conferences, classicists, archaeologists, and historians engage in a rigorous form of detective work. They piece together fragments, from the detailed excavation reports of the Telesterion's foundations to the passing mentions in ancient poetry and the clues in vase paintings. They debate the possible ingredients and effects of the kykeon, analyze the acoustics of sacred spaces, and theorize about the precise order of the days-long ceremony. This academic reconstruction is a painstaking puzzle with most of the pieces forever missing. The goal is not to perform the rites, but to understand their social function, their psychological impact, and their hold on the ancient mind. It is an attempt to map the contours of the silence, yet for all its rigor, this approach can only ever offer an external blueprint. It can describe the procession's route, but it cannot replicate the bone-deep anticipation of the pilgrim walking it. It can list the ritual stages, but it cannot access the transformative shock of the revelation in the dark. The scholar's path is one of analysis, and the ancient initiate's path was one of experience, a chasm that perhaps cannot be fully bridged by intellect alone. Meanwhile, in living rooms, forests, and gardens across the globe, a very different kind of reconnection is flowering. Within neo-pagan and Wiccan traditions, Demeter and Persephone are honored as central deities of the Wheel of the Year. Their myth provides the foundational narrative for the autumn equinox, a holiday many call Mabon. In these modern celebrations, the themes of the ancient mysteries are consciously embraced. Practitioners might create altars adorned with grains, pomegranates, and late-blooming flowers. They tell the story of the descent, fast in sympathy with Demeter's grief, and then feast to celebrate Persephone's eventual promised return. The focus is on the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, both in the natural world and within the personal soul. This spiritual revival is not an attempt to carbon copy the Eleusinian rites, an impossible task given the vow of secrecy. Instead, it is an act of inspired adaptation, drawing on the timeless emotional and archetypal power of the myth. It answers a modern hunger for a spirituality that is rooted in the earth's cycles, that honors the sacred feminine, and that finds profound meaning in the metaphor of the seed. Yet this beautiful revival also highlights the core ethical dilemma. The original mysteries derived their immense authority from their exclusivity and their irreplicable secrecy. The penalty for disclosure was death, a measure of how seriously the boundary between the initiated and the uninitiated was maintained. Today, in an age of information sharing and inclusive spiritual exploration, that boundary is deliberately porous. The very act of publishing a book about the mysteries or hosting a public workshop on the goddesses would have been an unimaginable sacrilege in the ancient world. So what is lost when a secret guarded for millennia becomes a story freely shared and adapted? Perhaps the modern engagements, both scholarly and spiritual, are not failures to recapture a lost secret, but a new kind of relationship with it. They acknowledge that the exact ritual sequence died with the last hierophant and can never be reclaimed. But they affirm that the human questions that drove millions to Eleusis, the fear of death, the search for meaning in loss, the hope for renewal, remain powerfully alive. We may never know the sacred object held aloft in the flash of firelight, yet we still look to the autumnal field, to the harvested stalk and the hidden seed, and feel the echo of that ancient wordless promise. The human mind, across all cultures, craves structure for its most profound transformations. We can see the staggering power of the Eleusinian Mysteries not just as ancient religion, but as a masterfully engineered psychological journey, a supreme example of what anthropologists call a rite of passage. This universal pattern, found in everything from tribal initiations to modern military boot camps, follows three distinct stages: separation, liminality, and reintegration. The architects of the mysteries, whether by divine inspiration or deep intuition, perfected this formula 2,000 years before it had a name. The first stage, separation, was a deliberate and physical tearing away from the familiar. It began the moment an initiate left their home and joined the solemn procession from Athens. This was not a casual stroll, it was a purposeful departure from daily life, from one's social identity as a farmer, a soldier, or a merchant. The ritual bathing in the sea, the fasting, the shared hardship of the walk, all served to strip away the comforts and distractions of the ordinary world. You were separated from your old self, made vulnerable, and prepared as a blank slate. This created a necessary emptiness, a sacred hunger, both physical and spiritual, making you receptive to what was to come. The journey itself was the threshold. Then came the core of the transformation, the stage of liminality. This word comes from the Latin for threshold, and it describes a state of being betwixt and between, where the old rules are suspended and the new identity has not yet been formed. The Telesterion was the ultimate liminal space. Inside that windowless hall, plunged into absolute darkness, all markers of time, status, and the outside world vanished. In that consuming blackness, you were no longer Athenian or Spartan, rich or poor. You were simply an initiate in a sea of other initiates, sharing a raw, primal humanity. The chaotic sensory bombardment, the sudden flares of firelight, the disorienting chants, the powerful symbolism, all of this was designed to break down your ordinary consciousness. It was a controlled crisis, a benevolent trauma to the psyche. In this liminal bubble, outside of normal time and social structure, the revelation could strike with maximum force. The sacred story of Demeter and Persephone was not heard. It was felt and embodied, becoming your own story of loss and hoped for return. This chaotic, in-between state was the crucible where the old understanding of death was melted away, ready to be recast. Finally, the initiate emerged into the third stage, reintegration. But you did not return to society as the same person who left. You returned forever changed, carrying a new piece of knowledge, a new certainty about the universe locked silently within you. The vow of secrecy was not just a rule, it was the mechanism of reintegration. It marked you as part of a new, invisible community, the community of those who knew. You walked back into your daily life, resumed your work and your family, but with a profound and private difference. You had faced the symbolic darkness and returned with a promise of light. This internal shift transformed your relationship with the greatest human fear. The anxiety of death, which shadows every life, was now framed by a divine narrative of cyclical return. Your personal griefs and losses could now be viewed through the lens of Demeter's epic sorrow, which itself had a joyous resolution. The rite of passage provided a cosmic script for personal suffering, giving it meaning and a promised end. This psychological framework explains why the experience was described as ineffable, why words failed those who tried to describe it. The transformation occurred not at the level of intellect, but at the deeper level of identity and emotion. The mysteries did not teach a philosophy. They engineered a perspective-altering experience, one that reorganized the initiate's inner world around a single, luminous certainty, making the return to ordinary life a journey back into a world forever seen through different and more hopeful eyes. That internal transformation, engineered by ritual, leads us to the most provocative modern question. Could the visions in the Telesterion have been unlocked not just by faith but by chemistry? The debate centers on that humble ritual drink, the kykeon, and a startling proposal from scholars like Karl Ruck and the famed chemist Albert Hofmann, the very man who first synthesized LSD. Their hypothesis is compellingly simple. The barley used to brew the kykeon could have been contaminated with ergot, a fungus that grows on damp grain. Ergot is the natural source of lysergic acid amides, compounds strikingly similar to the synthetic LSD Hofmann created. If the hierophants of Eleusis, through generations of observation, learned to cultivate or select ergot-infected barley, they would have possessed a powerful psychoactive sacrament. Proponents argue this provides a tangible mechanism for the unanimous reports of awe and life-altering vision. Imagine the synergy. An initiate weakened by a day of fasting drinks the kykeon. The psychoactive compounds begin to take effect as they enter the pitch-black, emotionally charged Telesterion. Their senses are already heightened by anticipation and fear. Then the ritual drama erupts, sudden blazes of fire, thunderous chanting, the powerful symbols revealed. In that state, the ergot alkaloids could catalyze profound visual and emotional experiences, making the myth of Persephone's return feel like a personal, witnessed reality. The initiate might truly believe they saw the afterlife or communed with the goddess. This theory elegantly bridges the spiritual and the scientific, suggesting the ancients discovered a sacred pharmacology, using the Earth's own chemistry to open a door in the human mind. It frames the hierophant not just as a priest, but as a master psychopomp, guiding souls through an inner landscape shaped by both ritual and a potent brew. However, this elegant theory faces significant and serious skepticism. Critics point first to the glaring lack of direct evidence. No ancient source ever describes visions resembling a modern psychedelic trip. The effects mentioned are emotional, awe, trembling, joy, not the complex visual hallucinations typically associated with such substances. Furthermore, ergot is a notoriously dangerous and unpredictable fungus. In medieval times, outbreaks of ergot poisoning, known as St. Anthony's fire, caused horrific suffering, gangrene, convulsions, and death. The idea that the hierophants could reliably produce a safe, visionary dose from such a toxic source strikes many as improbable. How could they ensure consistency for thousands of initiates without causing mass poisoning? Skeptics also champion the immense, often underestimated, power of the ritual setting itself. The combination of fasting, sensory deprivation, intense expectation, and masterful stagecraft is a potent psychological cocktail. When you are seated in utter darkness for hours, your mind becomes extraordinarily suggestible. A sudden flash of light can seem divine. A chanted phrase can feel like eternal truth. The shared emotional release of a crowd is a powerful intoxicant. Could this profound context, what we might call the theater of transcendence, be sufficient to explain the transformative experience? Many scholars believe it absolutely could, arguing that we do not need to invoke psychoactive chemicals to understand the power of a perfectly orchestrated rite of passage. The mystery, therefore, lingers in a tantalizing space between possibilities. Was the kykeon a simple, symbolic barley drink, its power purely that of sacred metaphor, or was it a carefully calibrated key, a chemical catalyst that allowed each person to journey into a visionary state where belief became perception? Perhaps the greatest secret of Eleusis is that the distinction might not have mattered to those who experienced it. Whether the door was opened by a molecule or by the mind's own readiness, what they found on the other side changed them forever. The ancient fires at Eleusis may have been extinguished, but the story they told refused to die. The myth of Demeter and Persephone escaped the sealed hall and found a second, eternal life in the human imagination, echoing through art, poetry, and the deepest layers of our own minds. Its first and most sacred literary telling is the Homeric hymn to Demeter, a poem so central to the cult that it was likely performed as part of the rituals themselves. This hymn is not just a story, it is a theological blueprint. It establishes the raw emotional power of the narrative, the devastating grief of the mother, the terrifying abduction of the daughter, and the hard-won compromise that brings life back to the world. For centuries, this version was the authoritative text, the source from which all other retellings would drink, but the myth proved too potent to remain confined to antiquity. It has been revisited and reimagined by poets and writers across the millennia, each finding in it a mirror for their own age. The Victorian poet Alfred Lord Tennyson captured the daughter's perspective in his sonnet Demeter and Persephone, giving voice to a Persephone who has grown into her dual role as queen of the dead and herald of spring. In the 20th century, the myth took on new, often darker, psychological shades. The poet Louise Gluck, in her collection Averno, uses the landscape of the myth to explore themes of trauma, captivity, and the complex, sometimes painful, bonds between mother and daughter. For Gluck, the underworld is not just a mythical place, but an internal state of depression or loss from which return is a complicated, uncertain struggle. This continual literary resurrection proves the myth's core is not a fixed dogma, but a flexible, living framework, a story that can hold our most primal fears about separation and our most fragile hopes for return. Beyond the page, the myth found a powerful home in modern psychology, particularly in the work of Carl Jung and his followers. Jungians see in Demeter and Persephone a supreme archetype, a primordial pattern embedded in the collective unconscious of humanity. This is the archetype of the mother-daughter bond, but it encompasses far more than a simple family relationship. It represents the entire cycle of attachment, separation, and transformation. Demeter embodies the nurturing, life-giving mother, the source of sustenance and unconditional love. Persephone represents the innocent maiden, the youthful psyche on the cusp of a profound and often involuntary change. Her abduction by Hades is not merely a violation, but a symbolic necessity, the painful but inevitable moment when the daughter's consciousness is pulled into the depths of the unconscious, into the realm of shadow, instinct, and inner power. The grief of Demeter, then, mirrors the necessary suffering of the psyche when one part of itself must evolve and separate. The joyous return is not a return to the old, childish innocence, but the reintegration of the transformed self, now carrying the wisdom of the underworld. For a woman, this archetype can map the journey from daughter to mature individual, often triggered by a real-life crisis, a loss, or a descent into depression that ultimately leads to greater self-knowledge. For a man, it can represent his relationship to his own inner feminine, his capacity for nurturing, and his connection to the cycles of nature. The myth provides a narrative for the most difficult passages of life, framing painful transitions not as meaningless suffering, but as chapters in a sacred, cyclical story of death and rebirth that is written into the very structure of the soul. This deep psychological resonance is inextricably linked to the myth's most obvious and enduring gift to Western thought, the personification of the seasons. Before the Greeks systematized their calendar with scientific precision, they understood the turning of the year through this powerful story. The barren winter was not an abstract meteorological phenomenon, it was the visible grief of a goddess. The explosive life of spring was not just warmer weather, it was the physical joy of a divine reunion. In explaining the natural world through divine emotion, the myth did something remarkable. It made the cosmos relatable. It infused the impersonal forces of nature with a heart and a story that every human could understand, because every human has known loss and the desperate hope for renewal. This framework fundamentally shaped how Western culture conceptualized time itself, not as a linear march, but as a cyclical drama of loss and return, decay and regeneration. Furthermore, the myth established a potent, enduring model of feminine divinity that stood in contrast to the often distant, patriarchal sky gods like Zeus. Demeter and Persephone represented divine power rooted in the earth, in the body, in the processes of birth, growth, death, and rebirth. Their authority came from the essential, life-sustaining mysteries of fertility and the grave. This concept of a powerful earth goddess, a mother who could defy even the king of the gods to retrieve what she loved, never fully left the cultural imagination. It resurfaced in medieval veneration of the Virgin Mary, in Renaissance allegories of nature, and in the modern reclamation of feminine spiritual archetypes. The whispered secret of Eleusis was about the fate of the soul, but the story that carried that secret gave us a language for the soul of the world itself, a world that grieves, sleeps, and awakens in an eternal, compassionate rhythm. The profound secret was not hidden in a vault but growing in every field. After exploring the grand architecture, the potent brew, and the psychological journey, we arrive at the quiet, earth-shattering heart of the matter. The ultimate revelation of Demeter's mysteries was not a complex theological doctrine. It was the simplest, most observable truth in human experience, made sacred through ritual. It was the truth of the seed. A farmer knows this truth in his hands. To get a harvest, you cannot hoard your best grain. You must take that perfect, plump kernel, the very symbol of life and sustenance, and you must bury it. You place it in the cold, dark, silent earth. You leave it there to rot. From our human perspective, this is an act of surrender, even of death. That seed as a seed is gone. It decomposes, yet from that dissolution, from that seeming end, something impossible happens. A green shoot pushes upward, drawing strength from the decay, reaching for the sun to create new life 100-fold. The rituals of Demeter took this agricultural fact and elevated it to a cosmic principle. They framed this cycle of burial and sprouting, of decay and regeneration, as the fundamental pattern of the universe itself. The myth of Persephone's descent and return was not merely a story to explain the seasons, it was the divine template for this pattern. Her time in the underworld was the seed's time in the soil. Her joyous return was the green shoot breaking the surface. The initiates did not just hear this story, they were guided to feel it in their bones. Their own ritual journey mirrored the process. The separation and fasting were the planting. The terrifying, liminal darkness of the Telesterion was the burial, the dissolution of the old self in the sacred earth. The ecstatic revelation and the return to the world of light was the sprouting, the emergence of a new understanding of life and death. By walking this path, they internalized the most hopeful logic imaginable. Their own mortality, the fear of the grave, was reframed. The body placed in the ground was not thrown into a final void. It was a seed entrusted to Demeter Psychoactive, the goddess of the fertile underworld, planted for a different kind of harvest. The blessed afterlife promised at Eleusis was not a denial of decay, but a promise of what comes after it, a new form of life sprouting from the very substance of the old. This is why the rituals were so bound to agriculture, to the Thesmophoria's sacred compost and the single ear of wheat revealed in the dark. the Hierophants were saying, "Look, the answer is here. It is in the ground beneath your feet. You see it work every year, but you fear it for yourself. Do not fear. You are part of this same cycle. Your life, your loss, your death, all follow this sacred regenerative grain." The secret, whispered for 2,000 years, was an invitation to see oneself not as a stranger to nature's law, but as its most intimate participant. To know this was to trade terror for a solemn, hopeful belonging. It did not promise immortality, but something perhaps more comforting to an ancient mind, a meaningful place in an eternal, nurturing pattern. The initiate could look at a plowed field in autumn and see not an end, but a necessary, sacred promise sleeping in the dark. We are left, then, with the most tantalizing silence of all. Despite the excavated stones and the scattered texts, the core of the Eleusinian Mysteries remains stubbornly, brilliantly hidden. We can map the procession route and measure the Great Hall, but we cannot hear the words spoken in the dark. We can list the ritual stages, but we cannot see what was held in the Hierophant's hand at the moment of climax. This gap in our knowledge is not a failure of scholarship. It is the echo of the vow itself, and it generates questions that have fascinated historians for centuries. What precisely was the content of the ultimate revelation? Was it a single, potent phrase, a sacred password for the soul whispered only in that hall? Or was it a sequence of symbolic actions, a sacred play so powerful it felt like divine truth? We simply do not know. Then there is the nature of the visionary experience. Did every initiate see and feel the same thing, a collective vision guided by the ritual's stagecraft? Or did the kykeon and the darkness act as a mirror, allowing each person to witness a deeply personal epiphany, unique to their own fears and hopes? The ancient sources speak of awe and trembling, of joy and tears, but they never describe the visual content. Was it a brilliant light, a vision of the goddesses, a glimpse of Elysian fields? The silence here is absolute. Another haunting question concerns access. While the Mysteries famously welcomed all, from enslaved people to emperors, did that democratic ideal hold true in the inner sanctum? Were there layers within layers? Did the wealthy initiate who could afford to return year after year, ascending to the rank of epops, witness something more profound or receive a more elaborate explanation than the poor farmer who could only make the journey once? The tiered system of initiation suggests a hierarchy of experience, but whether that translated to a hierarchy of spiritual reward is a mystery wrapped inside the secret. These are not just academic puzzles, they are the very source of the Mysteries' enduring power in our imagination. A completely explained ritual becomes a museum exhibit, interesting but static. The Eleusinian Mysteries, by their very design, resist that fate. Their essential unknowability makes them a perfect historical enigma, a black box from the ancient world that we can circle but never fully open. This forces us to engage with them not just as historians but as humans. We are compelled to project our own questions about life, death, and meaning into that dark hall. We must fill the silence with our own wonder. In doing so, we participate in a different kind of mystery, one that ensures these ancient rites never truly die, but continue to live in the perpetual curiosity of every new generation that encounters their story. From the public spectacle of the torchlit procession to the profound silence of the inner sanctum, we have traced the journey of Demeter's whispered secrets. This was never a path to a hidden fact, a password, or a piece of information to be memorized. The ultimate secret was an experience, a feeling engineered in the dark heart of the Telesterion. It was the visceral shock of understanding that the most terrifying human transition, our own mortality, was not a unique catastrophe, but part of a sacred, eternal pattern written into the world itself. The grief of a mother for a lost daughter became the template for every loss. The joyous return of spring became the promise for every soul. The rituals took the observable miracle of the buried seed and scaled it to the cosmos, offering a story in which every human life and every human death had a purposeful place. For 2,000 years, this transformative experience answered the deepest hunger, not for answers about the gods, but for meaning within the great cycles we all inhabit. It framed our fleeting existence within the enduring rhythm of the earth, turning fear into a kind of solemn belonging. That search for meaning in the pattern of life, death, and rebirth is perhaps humanity's oldest story, one we continue to tell in our own ways through science, art, and faith. The stones of Eleusis are silent, but the questions that drew millions to its gates still echo. What aspect of this ancient mystery resonates most with you? Was it the psychological power of the ritual, the bold theory of the sacred brew, or the simple, profound metaphor of the seed? Share your thoughts in the comments below.